This is the Anglo-Saxon Hall House. And what's interesting about this building is that it was built from scratch right here, based on archaeology and using traditional Anglo-Saxon building techniques.
So an Anglo-Saxon house, constructing it is a huge task without modern tools. You want to save as much of the tree as possible. So they were using a maul and wedges. That way, if you had a huge trunk in front of you, you don't need to use an axe to start chopping away and lose most of the material. You can save most of it by quartering it and then squaring it with axes. So you've got the wedge that sits nicely in a pre-made cut, and then you just start hitting it. And that way it will split and you've saved as much material as possible. This is mainly used for framing, and that's exactly how we prepared the wood on our Anglo-Saxon house. So we had Joe Thompson up here, the carpenter, who was preparing all of the wood, and then volunteers helped him to assemble it together. So we're inside our reconstructed Anglo-Saxon house. It's an interpretation of what we believe the Stenning Saxon house would have looked like. Of course, nothing of it remained above ground. It was all below ground with marks that we call ghosts. So a post goes into the ground, eventually it will rot away, stain the ground, and then we can find out exactly where the posts were. It means when you look at things like our roof, it's an interpretation of what we think the Stenning house would have been. It may have been a different shape. We've used an A-frame because there's good evidence that the Anglo-Saxons were using A-frames in roofs from a house that collapsed in the River Thames. This particular house, it's believed that it was a farmer's house. So although it was found in Marketfield in Stenning, which is right next to the church, in fact, the boundary bank that went around the two houses that were found encroaches on the graveyard, and a human femur was found inside. But it is believed that the people that lived here were farmers. So they would have used the space here heavily. They may have even slept here because the fire is right in the middle and that's where the heat is. We put these compartments back here. They could have been sleeping quarters. They could have been where animals, young animals, were kept, because of course there's wolves around at that time. Or it could have just been storage where they kept wood. So we're not 100% sure what those compartments would have been used for. Around the fire you would have found lots of pottery and cesspits and waste pits that were found at the excavation site. Shows that there was a huge amount of pottery. In one of the cesspits was an incredible find. It was a gold ring that was faceted on 11 sides, primary gold, so it's quite rare, and it had an inscription on there that says, "Aeswulf owns me." So we know the person's name who owned that ring. We can't be sure that it was the person who lived in this house, because that ring predates this house by 50 to 100 years. But it's pretty amazing that it was found in a cesspit, either purposely put there or lost. It could be that it was connected to the church. So because there's no fridges at the time and there's no way for them to store food, and that would be the biggest worry for majority of Anglo-Saxon England. Do they have enough food to get through the winter? It's impossible for us to imagine how that would feel, because we have food all year round, even food that's not seasonal to winter. We import it. We just can't imagine what it would be like. But for them, they need to be thinking months ahead about firewood and food. The perfect way for them to store food would be underground or above their own heads, because the smoke from the fire will go up into the roof and sit up there. If you were to hang meat up there in a sack with some salt, that smoke would draw out the moisture, and that's where the bacteria is. So it essentially will preserve it. We've even had goat's meat in the roof for 2 years before, and then we tried it and it was okay. Pretty tough, but if you put it into a stew, it was still preserved, which is amazing because a modern fridge wouldn't be able to preserve it for that long.
If you've ever wondered what life was like for an early medieval farmer, you can come and see for yourself. Visit Weald and Downland Living Museum and be part of something historic.